The High Gravity Basic Brewing discount code is back. If you go to highgravitybrew.com and purchase a Warthog electric system or controller and use the code EBC75BB, you'll save $75 off your purchase. And to find out the wide range of Warthog products eligible, head on over to basicbrewing.com and click on the High Gravity Basic Brewing Code Deals link on the right-hand side of the page. EBC75BB is good on the Build Your Own Brewing System page, Warthog Brew in a Bag, 2-vessel and 3-vessel systems, and, of course, the standalone controllers if you want to build your own system out of gear you already have. Take the pain out of propane for $75 off using EBC75BB on highgravitybrew.com. That's highgravitybrew.com. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, June 24th, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Scott Janish, author of The New IPA, a scientific guide to hop aroma and flavor, and co-founder of Sapwood Cellars, joins us to talk about biotransformation and genetically modified yeast, engineering yeast to better unlock hop compounds that result in more delicious hoppy beers. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows. If you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewers' logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. If you haven't already, you should watch the latest YouTube video from Matt Giovanisi on his Brew Cabin channel. You remember hearing Matt on this show talking about how he built his dream homebrew setup, and it is a dream if you watch the video. So I posted a link to that video on Facebook and Twitter. It's called NEPA, a Homebrew Odyssey. It's one of, if not the best homebrew video that I've seen, I think. A very high concept, a parody of one of my favorite movies, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I make a cameo appearance. I'm in the thing. In addition to being a lot of fun, Matt sneaks in some good homebrewing info and tips if you pay attention. That's on Matt's Brew Cabin channel, and Matt is also the producer of Money Lab. By the way, very talented guy. So check out my Facebook page or the Basic Brewing Radio and Video Facebook page from a few days ago, or the Twitter feed, or just go on to YouTube and search for Brew Cabin to find that video. It's a lot of. I'm very impressed with animation and all that stuff, and it feels like a Kubrick production. So. Anyway, I geeked out on that quite a bit. I got some good feedback on the latest YouTube video from Steve and me, Basic Brewing video that I posted on Friday. It was the one on my 100% Rauch malts smoked lager, and a Kolsch brewer on YouTube said, "Wonderful pronunciation of Rauch." So I hope I didn't screw it up just now. Appreciate that. Nick on YouTube says, Dieter is actually an ale yeast, Imperial's Kolsch yeast, but I'm okay with you calling it a lager. Well, thanks, Nick. I called this a lager because I fermented it at lager temperature. So, and it was a German yeast. So to me, nowadays, it's more about the process. If I fermented it warmer, maybe I probably wouldn't call it a lager. Although, did I call the Pilsners that Steve and I fermented at ale temperatures lagers? I don't know. Let's see. Sean on YouTube said, I brewed a Kolsch a couple weeks ago with Dieter that I got from stevesbrewshop.com. And I've never seen a yeast flocculate so completely. James was spot on when he said it flocculates hard. Wow! It was crystal clear in the fermenter after just a week. Simply amazing. and I like the flavor and aroma characteristics much better than the Lallemand Köln I used for the same recipe last time around. I've never used imperial yeast before, but if my high road to Taus fermented with Que Bueno turns out half as well, I'll be a convert. You guys always crack me up. Thanks for the great content. Well, thanks, Sean. It was nice. I'm sure that your beer brewed with yeast from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Organic Yeast will turn out great. And speaking of Imperial and YouTube, you should check out Imperial's new YouTube channel. It's got a bunch of very well-produced videos with demonstrations of the tests that Casey from Imperial talked about last time she was on the show. Forced fermentation, wort stability, and the diacetyl force test. And they've also got a video that shows the difference between batches of wort fermented with 200 billion cells, 150 billion, 100 billion, and 50 billion. And as you know, I like to say that my stir plate is dusty because I don't use it anymore to make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches, and that video demonstrates why my airlock is usually bubbling before bedtime. It pays to pitch the right amount of yeast, and with a recommended shelf life of 4 months, you can be confident when you pitch Imperial. Check out Imperial's YouTube channel by searching for Imperial Yeast. Ask your local homebrew shop about Imperial Organic Yeast, and check out their site at imperialyeast.com. imperialyeast.com. Over this past weekend, off topic, sort of off topic, I had a minor kitchen disaster. Not a brewing disaster, but it's put me behind on my brewing activities, so it's sort of related. I kind of sliced my thumb with a kitchen knife and had to go get it glued back together. wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Boy, when you see something like that, at least I tend to panic. So we ran to the dock and got it glued back together. I was told to keep it clean and dry, so I haven't been able to bottle the latest water profile sampler or keg the Belgian-inspired brown ale that I'm planning to rack onto the sweet dark cherry puree. However, I'm going to try to tempt fate and keg that beer this afternoon. I'm going to wear a big rubber barbecue glove to try to keep that cut dry. So wish me luck. I hope that I can get back. Although I haven't missed washing dishes, though, which is kind of a fringe or side benefit of having a sliced thumb that you got to keep dry. I even asked if I could, can I wear rubber gloves on our way? And the nurse said, no, they'll get all pruny and sweaty, and no, you can't. Okay, all right, well. And Susan was right there witnessing that, so. Okay. Scott Janish and Mike Tonsmeyer at Sapwood Cellars in Columbia, Maryland have always been at the forefront of experimenting with ways of making delicious beers. So let's talk to Scott about the latest tool that he's adding to the brewing toolkit. Scott Janish, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it's been a minute, as the kids say, since we've talked. I've talked to your partner, Mike Tonsmeyer, in between those times, but it's been a while since we talked about hops and hop compounds and things that confuse me, but I'm willing to learn.
Trust me, it's things that confuse me and take a lot of my brain bandwidth to try to wrap my head around. So hopefully we can make a little sense of some of it today.
You're making me feel better. I appreciate that. Don't be afraid to simplify things. What keyed this off, or what started this off, was you made a post on Instagram about biotransformation and genetically modified yeast. And I thought, now that's an interesting topic. That's an advanced topic that it's been a while since we really talked about advanced sciencey stuff on the podcast. And I thought this would be a fun thing to do. And are you using this information at Sapwood Cellars right now? Or are you actually applying the stuff that you're learning?
Yeah. In fact, we have a couple batches planned, and we have some in the works now that use some of these strains, and and we have some smaller, like, we still have our homebrew gear that we do a lot of small ferments on before we scale things up, and we've done that a number of times with some of this with information, and so it's exciting stuff. It's like you were kind of alluding to, it's a little challenging to wrap your head around, but I think once you kind of break it down, it makes a lot of sense, and it's biotransformation is just one of those areas that's been, for me personally, just really exciting to read new research on, but also very frustrating because it's been challenging to put that science into practice in a way that, rises to sensory, thresholds when you're doing tests with different parts of the science. So these, genetically engineered strains are finally where I'm starting to use the science in a way that makes sense in terms of like recipe development, and then actually, smelling the results and being, confident in it, that, what we're trying to do is actually happening. And thankfully to some of these labs actually testing some of these compounds, we know that that's true as well. So yeah, we're definitely experimenting with it a little bit, and don't have plans to like have these strains completely take over our portfolio, but it's I'll probably say a couple times, it's like another tool in the toolbox when you're brewing.
Sure. Now, when you say genetically modified or genetically engineered, that's going to raise some red flags for a lot of people out there, because there's a lot of information and probably a lot of misinformation out there about, GMO products. So talk about what you mean when you say genetically modified or genetically engineered yeast strains, and why we shouldn't be afraid of them, if we shouldn't.
Well, I won't try to convince anyone one way or another, but just kind of, I wrote a pretty long blog post, I think it was last month, that dives pretty deep into a lot of this stuff too. So if anyone's interested or confused, they can, try to read through that in more detail. But, essentially, genetically engineered strains are, in my mind, a lot different than, genetically engineered foods, where like, you engineer a seed that then gets, like Roundup ready seeds, for example, then get hit with, pesticides and herbicides, and that's a whole different thing. Where in yeast, they're essentially just changing some of the genes to target certain fermentation characteristics, or, like turning on or off the gene that's responsible for phenolic characters, or in the case we're talking today, really turning on the gene that, is responsible for bioconversion. And there's really two kind of main segments or parts of, of genetically engineered strains, where there's the cisgenic and the transgenic strains. So really what that means is a cisgenic strain is one that takes a gene from another yeast strain. So it's inserting genes into a yeast strain that's already found in other yeast strains. So you're not inserting a gene from any other outside source or organism. Where transgenic is one where you are doing that. You're taking a gene from, and a lot in earlier wine research, they take it from like E. coli, surprisingly, that has a gene that's very good at unlocking bound compounds, in that case in wine grapes. And so those are the two main kinds, and both of them I've used. In terms, Omega Yeast has one that's coming out later this summer. Theirs is a cisgenic, and then transgenic is one from like Berkeley Yeast, but it's all food grade sources, and so it's we get into those in more detail, I'm sure, but that's kind of a little bit of a background on the two types and kind of how I see it. A different thing when it comes to some of the food GMO arguments.
I had E. coli one time, and it really unlocked some compounds in me, but that's another issue.
That's great.
I guess is this like using the CRISP technology where they take like genes that make jellyfish glow and they put it into another organism to kind of track, track some things happening, and then they're actually doing this kind of thing. It sounds like kind of the same stuff.
Yeah, so, like omega yeast, for example, and I should say that both of these labs have been like super helpful for me to understand this, and really laying out their process and sharing some of the strains before they get released. So I'm super thankful to Berkeley and Omega for keeping me in the loop on these things. But yeah, for Omega in particular, they use CRISPR technology, and really what they're doing is taking a gene that they know is I guess it's tricky. I guess I almost should talk about just biotransformation as like a little jumping off point to kind of base some of this off, so it makes a little more sense. So biotransformation, a lot of times I think a lot of brewers think of it as just a mid-fermentation dry hop is sort of what they think of as their biotransformation edition, but I think it really goes a lot deeper. And for me, I like to think of it at least in two different ways. There's the biotransformation of like one compound to another compound. So that can be like, geraniol that comes from hops that gets converted into beta citronellol. So that's like it takes more of a rose, herbal kind of flavor and transforms it into like a citrus, almost lime-like flavor. And that's the type of biotransformation that's happening with ale strains that we are probably using for making hoppy beer. That's one we know happens. So that's kind of the one kind of pocket of biotransformation to me, is converting one compound to another. And the other is unlocking bound compounds. So hops themselves have both free compounds that are like in a free state that when you introduce them to beer, whether it's like dry hopping or whirlpool, they're released into the beer, and you can measure them, and if it gets above threshold, you can smell and taste them. But they also contain a whole bunch of bound compounds that really are just kind of potential that goes unnoticed in a hop, which is unfortunate. And in the case of so like there's bound like monoterpene alcohols like linalool and geraniol, that those can be released, and there's also bound thiols, which are another hop component. So thiols are like, they're sulfur compounds, but they are less than 1% of like a hop's total oil, but they are so potent that it doesn't take much of these to make a difference in a beer, and they have an unbelievable amount of bound thiols, particularly 3-MH in hops. And so like I have a chart when I posted about this, that one study looked at like 17 different hop varieties, and the amount of bound 3-MH, which is a grapefruit leaning thiol, was just way more than the 3-MH in the free form. And so in order to unlock these, in order to bioconvert them, if you will, you need enzymes that can actually unlock it and make these into their essentially a free state. So in the case of there's only like two main enzymes that we can talk about here in terms of bioconverting, and one is beta glucosidase. So that is unlocking bound like monoterpene alcohols from hops. So that's like your again like the linalool and geraniol. And then there is beta lyase, which is a separate enzyme that can unlock these bound thiols. And so yeast strains themselves generally don't have they don't produce these enzymes naturally. There's a handful now that are being tested by Lallemand, for example. I think it's BRY97 that does produce beta glucosidase, so it can unlock some of those monoterpene alcohols. But it's really, to me, like the thiols is where you need to focus your attention to really drive some big sensory results. And so that's why a lot of the research in terms of genetically engineered strains are focusing on the genes that produce that are responsible for creating this this gene that is responsible for creating the enzyme during fermentation. So a little bit of a background on the two different types. So essentially, it's beta-glucosidase is the enzyme to release bound terpenes, and beta-lyase can unlock bound thiols. And so you can actually purchase, I mean, this has been around in the wine world for a long time, the enzymes directly. And so you're just dosing in, it's like little granules. That's the enzyme responsible for these things. And I've experimented with that a number of times, and honestly just haven't gotten the results that I've gotten with some of these engineered strains. So,
yeah, that was going to be my question. If it's the enzymes you're looking for, why not just buy some enzymes and put them in there? But it sounds like they're just not as effective as the sort of natural process.
Yeah, I mean, it's so like I've used and I've written about, like, Scott Labs has not my lab. Surprisingly, I've been asked that a few times. Scott Labs was mine. I wish it was. No, it's not. But they have expression aroma and revelation aroma are two different enzymes, and one of them is a beta-glucosidase enzyme, and the other, they say, releases thiols. It's really intended for winemaking, so the thiols from grapes, but it doesn't specifically say it's beta-lyase, and so that's maybe part of the reason that I don't get huge results with that. But the Lallemand right now also has it's called like aromase or something like that is designed to, it's a beta-glucosidase enzyme that you can use to unlock some of these terpenes. So although I don't think like the terpenes, if you unlock a bunch of these, isn't going to make your beer just like, wow, I can't believe I haven't been doing this my whole life. But I think it does build in some more complexity through, hop synergy, and all these compounds work together. So the more of these you can kind of free and release, I think, the better the whole of the beer could be. So I think there's a role for both in beer in terms of thinking about potentially using beta-glucosidase enzymes with like a genetically modified yeast strain. So there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of experimenting to still be done, but it's pretty exciting stuff.
Let's take a break to talk about our friends and sponsors, Ricky and Kelly from Groenfell Meadery up in Vermont. Ricky is excited about the Midsummer Bundle by Groenfell and Havoc. The Midsummer Bundle brings together two classic favorites, Buckland Mead, made with green rooibos tea and lemon, and Valkyrie's Choice, which is a refreshingly dry mead based on Viking-era ceremonial meads. The Midsummer Bundle includes 2 4-packs of each of those, with your choice of a wooden or a horn tankard. How fun is that? Drinking mead out of a tankard made of a horn? Sounds like a perfect summertime combination. You get free shipping on orders over $70 delivered to most states around the country. Check out all the deliciousness at family-owned and operated Groenfell.com. That's GROENNFELL. Now, is there anything in the yeast's best interest to have the genes themselves naturally to produce these enzymes? Does it benefit the yeast in any way to have these enzymes to break down these compounds or to unbound these compounds, or is it just like a kind of weird mutation that has this kind of side effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think how I understand it through some of the research is, they think that the unlocking of these precursors is actually happening within the yeast cell, and so potentially that's why a modified strain where the yeast itself is doing it versus an enzyme that's dosed directly maybe that's why. But that's just a guess on my part. That would be question probably for someone that's in the lab testing these things. But I will say, like, just using some of the enzymes, like to free some glycosides, it seems like it has the potential just to help your beers stay hoppier longer. I don't know if there's a little bit, especially if they warm up a little bit. I think you might be seeing some of that freeing happening in the package, potentially still freeing compounds after the fact. And so I think there's something to be said there. One of the Indian pale lagers that we did, where we actually used a beta-glucosidase enzyme during on the large scale, we've only done it a couple of times. That was one of the beers, it could have been for other reasons, but it was definitely one of the beers that held on to its like fresh hoppiness longer than pretty much any beer I've made before. So can't say it's just because of that, but it definitely could be a factor. And I think in lagers, there's less to hide behind, and I think hops can just shine a little better anyways.
Mm-hmm. So what about, you've mentioned temperature a bit. What role does temperature play in the process? If you add hops on the hot side, are those compounds denatured so that they're not there to be unlocked and unbound? Is it important to add the hops on the cold side of the process? Or talk about, when to add the hops to get the most out of it, and what role temperature plays in the whole thing.
Yeah, I think, in terms of getting these bound precursors into your beer, I think it's important to try to get them in before the yeast is active and going. Since if it's happening in the cell wall, you want those to be going, those precursors to already be in there so they can act on them right away, is kind of how I look at it. And to do that is, just classic, whirlpool hopping is one way to get these precursors in. So essentially the two main thiols that we're talking about here is 3-MH, which I mentioned is like a grapefruit one, and 4-MMP, which is another one that you'll hear about quite a bit, that's described as like box tree, which is, I always think, kind of a strange descriptor. But
doesn't sound delicious.
Yeah, like blackcurrant, I think, is another one for it. But 4-MMP is one that you can get into your beer just through dry hopping. There's actually a recent paper that was just put out, I believe, this year, that tested commercial hazy IPAs, and only 4-MMP was above taste threshold in the commercial hazy IPAs that they tested. And the 3-MH levels weren't above threshold, I believe, in any of them. And so that's kind of surprising, considering how much potential there is in some of these hops, especially when you look at their bound potential. And so what these yeast strains can do with the enzyme, in fact, just to make this a little more kind of confusing and to me a little mind-blowing, is these 3-MH precursors, they're called like cis-3-MH compounds. They're actually in grain. So they are able to use these yeast strains, not use any hops at all, and get above threshold, actually quite a bit above threshold, using no hops at all, just from the precursors from the grain.
Wow. Which
is amazing, considering, hazy IPAs that were tested, at least the handful that they didn't have it at all, and that was, loaded with hops. So it's definitely, if you think about the precursors that are just in grain, as well as using hops that are high in precursors. Interestingly, just like every hop has a different level of myrcene and linalool, they all have different levels of these bound thiols too. So one paper that I quote I reference, that I think they looked at 17 different varieties, found like Calypso and Saws and Simcoe and Nugget and Cascade to be some of the highest in these bound compounds, where the hops you typically think of to like dry hop with, we always call them the cheater hops, so like the Citra, Mosaic, those have a lot of the free, like 4-MMP, for example. So that's probably why they work so good as a dry hop. But when it comes to trying to get these precursors in if you're using genetically engineered strain that can unlock them, or enzymes directly. It's those Calypso and Sawses of the world that might be best to use in the whirlpool or even in the mash.
So and I may be getting into an area that I know too little about, but in talking about hop creep, isn't hop creep where you dry hop and there are enzymes that are in the hops that basically continue the breakdown of the starches and kind of have a secondary fermentation effect? Do those? Am I saying that right, or those enzymes?
Yeah.
Do those enzymes enter into the equation at all in this in biotransformation?
I think you could kind of you can find some sort of a correlation between. I mean, so in hop creep, that's really, the enzymes are very similar to the enzymes that are in your mash that are freeing up, starches into fermentable sugars. Hops themselves have enzymes that can free up dextrins and make an otherwise non-fermentable sugar fermentable. And so that's typically happens. That those enzymes coming from the hops are more active at warmer temperatures, which is why I like to try to get people to experiment with cooler dry hopping, and there's a bunch of other ways to try to keep that down. But it's a separate enzyme that's unlocking these bound compounds than what's freeing up those dextrins. So it's all enzyme related, but they are different enzymes. But there could be some potential with throwing these hops into your mash that are really high in these bound compounds, just because there's so much enzyme activity happening in your mash that you might be making it easier for these yeast strains and enzymes during fermentation to then act on them and free them. So I can't wait to see more testing on that, but that'll be interesting if mash hopping becomes even more of a flavor oriented maneuver. It's already, I encourage it just based off some research that shows that mash hopping can complex metals that can be problematic. So the alpha acids and beta acids in hops during a mash hop can complex iron and copper that can cause issues down the line in terms, especially the case with hazy IPAs. But if you can also get some unlock, or at least getting some of these precursors into your beer that could be unlocked during fermentation, is a added bonus to something like mash hopping. But there's more to be tested in that area.
Now, it's been a few years, but I talked to a brewing expert that shall remain nameless, who was a skeptic on biotransformation, and he didn't think it was a real thing. Is there enough science now, a few years later, to kind of prove that it is a real thing and not something just beyond just sensory evaluation?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, even going back to I think 2004, when the wine world was looking at actually creating some genetically engineered strains that have these enzymes that can bioconvert. I mean, they're noticing, even today, like the Omega, I have a chart on there where they have their posted results where you can actually see against the control these compounds that we're looking at, these thiols, much higher. The control without a yeast strain that doesn't have the gene inserted to create these enzymes is like 0 of like 3-MH, for example. But the one with the genetically engineered strain is well above threshold, and so that's on paper and sensory is a great example of biotransformation happening. I just think there's a lot of confusion about the term in general and what kind of biotransformation is happening, because there's like I attempted to say earlier, like a couple different kind of pathways or ways it can happen. But I think when it comes to unlocking these styles is really where skeptics might go, wow, yep, this is definitely something I can taste. For example, Berkeley Yeast is, I don't know if they've come out with it yet, but their strain is called Tropics. And this one is, so essentially they take a gene that they know creates this enzyme, but they don't just insert the gene into like a hazy IPA strain, but they actually insert it and then turn it up. So they're like turning the volume up. They're overexpressing that gene. So not only does it create this enzyme, but it just does it, I don't know how many fold it actually is, but in my mind, I just think of it as, it's not as simple as turning up the volume on a stereo, but that's kind of how I envision it. And so again, they're getting way above threshold without even using hops. And that strain in particular is like so guava passion fruit forward, just from using the precursors in grain, that it's kind of crazy.
And when you say threshold, you're saying the sensory, the threshold of sensory detection, right? In other words, there's below the threshold you can't taste it or smell it, and above the threshold you can.
Yep, exactly. Yep, and with 3MH in particular, it's not very high, and they're just blasting way past it. I think Omega's is yeast strain, which they're coming out with, is going to be called Cosmic Punch, and theirs is way above threshold as well. But I think Berkeley's is even higher, and that's not to say one is better than the other. They're completely different strains, and it's really what you're after.
Now, what if you can get these compounds from malt, from grain? What about other adjunct ingredients like fruits and such? Can you utilize this same technology with those?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think just towards what the wine world is doing. That's a fruit. It's a grape that these enzymes can unlock a lot or unlock some of these bound compounds that are in fruit as well. I think my understanding, some studies going on right now where they're going to look at other fruits. I know that we've done it. I've fermented some fruits at the brewery with some of these strains, and it's like a seltzer base and then just fruit. And there's definitely changes. I've done some side by sides of a typical like champagne strain versus one of these. I always call them style driving strains, and they're not even close to the same. And and that's just, it has to be from the precursors for the most part. In my mind, it's precursors from just that are in the fruit, but how much of the precursors is in the fruit is, I'm not entirely sure.
Now, what about homebrewers? Is this stuff available to homebrewers out there to play with? And what advice would you give a homebrewer who, got their hands on some of this?
I believe it's, I think the Berkeley one, you can reach out to them now, and I think they are selling it. It's probably I imagine there's trademarks or whatever that has to go through, but I'm pretty sure that they are selling it now. I hope so, because I wrote that in a blog post. And like I said, Omega's is coming out this summer, if everything goes to plan. And so, I think you just kind of, if you have the ability to do side-by-side ferments, I think that's always the greatest way to play with some of these strains, to really, see the difference between using one of these versus not. But I think that to really take advantage of them, I think it helps to really load up your beer with these precursors. And so that's, doing 2 or 3 ounces of Saaz or Calypso in your mash, and another 2 or 3 with your Whirlpool addition, potentially co-fermenting with some fruit that maybe matches the descriptors of your hops. Some wine kind of hybrid IPAs are really fun to do. So both the grapes and the hops themselves could have precursors that, could unlock some of these flavors. There's a lot of things I can't wait to do with it, but it's still, new, and we're still kind of sort of just starting our trials here. But, there's other products, Phantasm powder is being used in more in professional beers, commercial beers, and that's basically like a wine grape powder. And I'm pretty sure that those powders will have a lot of these precursors too. So yeah, there's a lot you could experiment with once you get your hands on them, but I think really it's just like realizing how much potential is in some of these hops that you wouldn't think about. And I think especially if some of these strains could get to, some other countries where they aren't as lucky as us, where they can always just, go to their local homebrew shop and get Citra and Galaxy and Mosaic, using some of these strains to really make, some of the hop varieties that you don't think about as being good ones in an IPA, but with the right enzymes, releasing some of these styles could really make some great beers.
Sure. Now, I take it you're just doing pilot batches at this point, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Next month, we're going to do a large-scale beer with one of them, with one of the strains. And so that'll be our one of the first. We've done a few with hybrid strains, so that's a little different. That's not a engineered strain. That's kind of where they hybridize two different strains. So in that case, it was like a wine strain that is known to bioconvert with like a London Ale 3 or equivalent type. And so that works because you get the gene in there that's responsible probably for that bioconversion, but you can't turn it up. For example, it's not overexpressed. And whenever you kind of mate two different yeast strains, you get the good and the bad with both. And that's where the genetically engineered strains are a little different because they're so targeted. You can just insert one gene that does one thing, where if you combine two yeast strains, you get like, for example, the one we did at the brewery that was a wine hybrid, it didn't flocculate very well, so it was very hard to harvest. Maybe a tiny bit of phenolic character just from the wine yeast. So although you might get some of that bioconverting, it might be covered up by phenols or other esters. Whereas if you're doing that more targeted approach, you can get some better results. And I'm happy about these strains just because for the last couple of years I've been doing so many ferments with wine yeast that are known to be great in the wine world for bioconverting. But each time I kind of did them on their own, they were a little weird with hops. And then when I did them with like a co-pitch with, I like to use a RVA Manchester strain. That's a yeast lab in Richmond, Virginia. It would just, there's other aspects to that ferment that the wine yeast create naturally that just kind of covered up any potential converting. So this targeted approach is kind of refreshing and saves a lot of batches going down the drain.
So when you actually start using these in production, are you going to face any, say, labeling challenges or like consumer education challenges, or because you're kind of swimming upstream with the, like I said, near the beginning with the GMO sort of public, I don't know if you'd say backlash, but the sentiment that if people are putting non genetically modified on their products, you can say that you can tell that it's an issue that people are aware of. So are there challenges with you putting this into a production environment?
I guess there could be, and there could be some people with concerns. We've done it in some smaller batches that we have sold, pilot batches that we've sold, and we say in the description, this yeast strain was made with CRISPR technology designed to, enhance the fruitiness of the beer, or whatever the language was. It's not my understanding, or to my knowledge, I don't think you have to put anything on there that says it was made from an engineered strain. I think, like I was trying to say earlier, I think it's a big leap comparing, some foods made this way versus these strains, especially if the cisgenic approach, which is just taking a gene that's already in yeast, just a different strain. It's almost like, taking a Belgian yeast strain's ability to create phenolics and putting it into a hazy strain. I mean, you're not really creating anything crazy there. You're just, picking and choosing which ones are getting in there. But I don't, if a beer is made with genetically I guess this is more of a question because I don't know the answer, but if a beer is made with genetically modified corn, I don't know if you have to put that on the label. I'm not really sure how that works, and thankfully Mike's a lot better at doing our legal stuff, and this is probably a good example why.
Well, what was it? Was it Golden Promise that was created in the lab with like gamma rays or something?
Yeah. Mike was trying to explain that to me not too long ago, which was interesting. But I'll stay away I don't want to say anything wrong about how that's created.
So there may already be some genetically modified stuff out there if it's been pelted by gamma rays, like Bruce Banner.
Right. And I think genetically engineered strains, or my understanding, has been used for a long time in like pharmaceuticals and bio, creating energy and things like that. So you're not directly eating that stuff. Well, I guess you are consuming some of the medicine that's created, but I just think that genetically engineered, like the CRISPR technology, is it's in more things than I think we probably realize at this point. It's not something I really thought about until I started looking into these strains and trying to write about it, where I was like, wow, it's like the whole center of your grocery store, all those center aisles is made with pretty much some form of a genetically modified food. But again, I think that's probably a little separate topic. And
yeah, that's a conversation that we need to get Chris Colby in here on one side of the argument, and
yeah,
and one of the food writer book people, the food book writer people, in on the other side. But it's interesting. I mean, it sounds like this is so much more advanced from. When I first got into brewing, this is like nothing like what we were talking about back then. But it's all in the pursuit of deliciousness.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you're just trying to create. Well, it's almost just like it's exciting whenever there's a new, just like if there's a new yeast strain that comes out or a new hop variety, it's exciting to try it for the first time. And that's, kind of the same excitement I get with these strains. It is kind of like, I guess it's kind of next level knowledge. I mean, you'd have to be really into beer to be really into brewing to dig into the science of some of this stuff. And I think sometimes you don't have to know. You can just try the yeast strain and be like, wow, I like how it performs. You don't need to know all the reasons why. But I think it's also going to be interesting to see, if things like this take off a little bit, or if, even just using enzymes directly, it gets improved or, becomes more widespread in terms of usage. Our hop supplier is potentially going to want to say, right now they don't always even say, which styles or how many styles are in there. But I mean, at some point, it'd be nice to know, how many 3MH or what's the percentage of 3MH in a certain hop variety that's both in its free and bound state. That would be information that would be great to have.
Yeah.
I think it is, kind of next level, and definitely not where my head was when I first started brewing with my, Brooklyn beer kit. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have to know how the engine works to drive the car. Thank goodness.
Same here.
Well, Scott, this has been fun, and I take it that this kind of stuff will be in the second edition of your new IPA book. Maybe it'll be called the newer IPA.
Newer, there we go. Yeah, there's already been a couple things that I kind of theorized that it's been kind of proved wrong. Not, in recent, it's this problem with writing about science is it's always, and that's actually the exciting thing writing, about, hop science in particular, is it just keeps, the understanding gets better. And then when you think you understand it, then there's more questions, but that's, it's fun to keep on top of. And yeah, hopefully I can update that at some point. That would be fun.
Excellent. Well, keep us posted, and I'll be watching the your Instagram and Sapwood Cellars Instagram and Mike Tonsmeyer's Instagram for all the
there we go.
all the tasty stuff that y'all are producing. I appreciate your. This has been fun. I appreciate your getting together.
Yes, thanks again for having me on, and I'm glad putting some sort of poster on Instagram. I'm glad you took the bait and then invited me back.
You could just email me directly.
I'm just kidding. But hopefully we made a little bit of sense today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Scott.
Yep, anytime.
Well, thanks again to Scott. If you brew hoppy, juicy beers and haven't read Scott's book, The New IPA, you should. A lot of good information in there, and it's written to where even I can understand it. Sapwood Cellars is on my bucket list of places to visit. Maybe a growler list. Maybe they should call it a growler list when it's breweries that you want to visit. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.